It was 18,000 studies in 2025. There were 18,000 studies, and 42.7% of Americans are obese. If we're studying this obesity epidemic with such precision, with all these different angles that we're taking to figure out what's wrong, it doesn't really seem like we're making any progress in terms of implementing what we're learning in these studies. It kind of led me to believe that we're overcomplicating health. Health is actually just meant to be very simple. It's not meant to be this thing that has all these hacks, all these different shortcuts, all these different cheat codes. Health is incredibly simple. Fuel your body with rest, real food, clean environments, and use it for purpose. We're not really studying health anymore. We're just studying disease. We've gotten to a point now where it almost seems like a charade. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Meat Mafia Podcast. I'm your co-host, Harry Gray, and today I am solo. I'm feeling a little bit naked here. No Brett, no guests. I've only ever done this one other time. This was this was a while back. It was episode 227. I did a solo podcast from my closet. Brett and I were living together at the time. I was recording out of this janky microphone setup in my closet. Now we've got a nice studio set up here. I've got Jimmy behind the camera. It's just me and him today. So this is going to be quite the rip. I'm super excited because that episode 227, the solo rip that I did in my closet, actually was the most popular episode we've ever done. It's the most downloaded episode that we've ever recorded. And it was literally me just doing a practical guide to the carnivore diet. It was super simple, but I just gave these basic tips on how to eat a carnivore diet and how to do it in a way that isn't crazy restrictive, is super simple, and can just be a tool. So I think for most people, they think about diet, they start to make it part of their identity. And one of the things that we talk a lot about on the show is just making these things tools that you can use to just slowly implement and start to improve your health over time, experiment, and not really fall down any dogmatic path where, you get trapped into diet culture, which, can be crazy. But on today's episode, I'm going to be talking about an essay that I wrote. So I wrote an essay last week called the Over-Intellectualization of Health. And for me, this was such a fun process in writing this because it's something that's been on my heart for a long time. Something that I've felt like I've needed to say, but haven't been able to really put it all on paper. So I ended up writing a little piece called the Over-Intellectualization of Health. If I have to say that one more time, this podcast might not get done. But it was 18,000 studies in 2025. There were 18,000 studies, and 42.7% of Americans are obese. And that just gave me some pause. I had to stop there and just think a bit about, if we're studying this obesity epidemic with such precision, with, all these different angles that we're taking to figure out what's wrong, it doesn't really seem like we're making any progress in terms of implementing what we're learning in these studies. And it kind of led me to believe that we're overcomplicating health, and health is actually just meant to be very simple. It's not meant to be this thing that has all these hacks, all these different shortcuts, all these different cheat codes. Health is incredibly simple, it turns out. Fuel your body with rest, real food, clean environments, and use it for purpose, and joy. And, I think that we're not really studying health anymore. We're just studying disease. And I think that we've gotten to a point now where it almost seems like a charade. It seems like this is just part of, whether conscious of it or not. And I think we're just kind of willfully unconscious of it, but we're just numb to this charade, this theater that we're watching where it's, ping pong versions of, sugar's bad for you, sugar's good for you, do this, do that. It seems distracting to the overall message that health is simple. So in that article, I ended up kind of distilling health down to 6 simple pillars: rest, fuel, movement, reducing toxins, community, and then an inside out health approach. So starting with spirituality, actually. So having some element of spiritual health and, diving into spiritual disciplines. We've talked about that on the podcast before, but I think it's incredibly overlooked. I know, at certain points in my life, I've absolutely overlooked it. And I think it's critical. And, you even see that in the Blue Zone studies, that one of the common threads is that these different subsets of very healthy centenarian communities, they've all lived, they live to 100, and they all have some sort of spiritual practice. So just want to call that out. Before I get into the podcast, I want to give a quick shout out to Noble Origins, which is our supplement brand. We've got the product right here. This is Noble Origins. This is Brett and mine's supplement brand. We have a protein powder, and it's an all-in-one protein powder that tastes incredible. It tastes so good. It's like Swiss Miss. It's that nice, like, chocolate milk, Nesquik, just incredibly delicious, but also nutrient dense. So we've got collagen, colostrum, and organ complex, and then what I believe to be the best form of supplemental protein out there, which is beef protein isolate. We have 21 grams of protein in there. So just a great product. We love it. And if you're a supporter of the show, we would love if you went to www.nobleorigins.com and supported us there. Use code Meat Mafia for 15% off. All right, let's get into it. Ooh, my laptop just went all over the place. All right, here we go. So, I was digging into this topic of just over-intellectualizing health, and there was this incredible study. It's called The Epidemiology of Obesity, A Big Picture. And I just want to read through this intro because I think it just captures what I'm talking about in such a perfect way. It really sets the stage here. So the epidemic of overweight, actually, I'm going to give a little shout out here to the authors as well, just so I'm not, completely butchering their work. So this is, you can find this on PubMed. It's Adela Ruby and Frank Hugh. Sorry, I just completely butchered their last names, but go find that on PubMed. All right, here we go. The intro to their paper. The epidemic of overweight and obesity presents a major challenge to chronic disease prevention and health across the life course around the world. Fueled by economic growth, industrialization, mechanized transport, urbanization, an increasing sedentary lifestyle, and a nutritional transition to processed foods and high-calorie diets over the last 30 years, many countries have witnessed the prevalence of obesity in its citizens double and even quadruple. Rising prevalence of childhood obesity in particular forebodes a staggering burden of disease in individuals and healthcare systems in the decades to come. A complex, multifactorial disease with genetic, behavioral, socioeconomic, and environmental origins, obesity raises risk of debilitating morbidity and mortality. Relying primarily on epidemiologic evidence published within the last decade, the non-exhaustive review discusses the extent of the obesity epidemics, its risks, known and novel, and economic impact across the world. And then it continues to say, obesity is a complex, multifactorial, and largely preventable disease affecting, along with overweight, over a third of the world's population today. If secular trends continue, by 2030, an estimated 38% of the world's population, adult population, will be overweight and another 20% will be obese. In the USA, the most dire projections based on earlier secular trends point to over 85% of adults being overweight or obese by 2030. I'm going to pause there. Over 85%, this is them projecting this, over 85% of adults being overweight or obese by 2030. That's insane. That is insane. Put a pin in that one. While growth trends and overall obesity in most developed countries seem to have leveled off, morbid obesity in many other countries continue to climb. We got a little, hold on, give me one sec. Some technological issues over here. Where were we? Countries continue to climb, including among children. In addition, obesity prevalence in developing countries continues to trend upwards toward U.S. levels. All right, the TLDR on that is summarized in that 85% of adults 85% of adults in the U.S. are trending in 2030 to be overweight or obese. That to me is so alarming, in the fact that we're spending as much money as we are on this problem and as much time and resources from an academic standpoint. To me, it seems like we've missed the plot. We've totally lost the plot. And so I want to kind of just ground us in that thought that, it's great that we're studying this problem. It's great that we're trying to figure out all the different angles to address it. Or, I don't even know where these 18,000 plus studies are actually going towards. I don't know what they're studying. But if you just look at the data, in 1970, there were about 150 studies out there about obesity. Or in that year, there were 150 studies done. 12% of people were obese. So much smaller than, today's numbers. And then you look at where we're at today, 18,000 plus studies, and we're at 42.7% obesity rate, which honestly feels, that's a staggering number. Hard to even fathom that we're there. And I think that my article really called out the fact that we are putting so much horsepower, so much intellectual capacity behind this problem, and we're getting just zero results. I mean, to me, it's amazing. So once I wrote this paper, I was like, what else can I do to kind of quantify this disconnect? And so I came up with a ratio. Love a good ratio, don't you? Just put a little math behind it. So came up with this number of obesity studies to obesity prevalence ratio. So we're going to call this the SOAR ratio, or the obesity studies divided by obesity prevalence. This is just super. We're getting technical out here on the Meat Mafia podcast, but what we see in that period from 1970 to 2025 is just this balloon in the amount of just people focused on trying to solve this problem from an academic standpoint. And then it just seems like I'm looking at this number go from 12% to 42%. And to me, it's like, why even bother studying it if you're not going to at least, stop the momentum of this obesity epidemic somewhat? And so I think, this number is obviously, I'll be the first one to self-criticize here. This is not a great metric in terms of just approaching this from a data scientist perspective. There's a large number of things that you could point to, I think that it's kind of a dumb but perfect number, or dumb but perfect metric, this SOAR, because to me it kind of quantifies our over quantification in a bit. And so we've seen here that if I were to put my data scientist hat on, I would tear this number apart. I can hear critics saying, Harrison, there's no causal link between these studies and obesity, or, those variable studies are, there's studies over prevalence are totally arbitrary. Fair points. I get it. I think I'm setting this up that way. But here's why the SOAR works. It's not trying to be a lab report. It's a wake up call. Not trying to be a lab report. That jump from 12.5% in 1970, to 432.27 in 2025 screams one thing: our scientific community is so busy studying obesity, churning out so many papers, that we just lost sight of actually fixing the problem. We're just, kind of coasting. It just feels like we're, self-aggrandizing, trying to prove that we understand the problem more and really get like a little badge of honor from our academic institution as opposed to actually fixing the problem. And I think this number, to me, it's dumb, simple, and there's flaws in the approach, but it illustrates that point. And I think the SOAR's power is in its simplicity. It shows the disconnect. We've got brilliant minds, millions of dollars, and 42.7% of us are still obese. It's not about precision. To me, it's about the truth. And so we're stuck in a cycle of, studying instead of acting. And I think that this metric kind of exposes that a little bit. And I just want to press in on this idea that this is kind of this grandiose theater, because, I think that I'm not trying to get too conspiratorial here, but I do just want to unplug and plug the computer back in for a second, because I feel like we're just kind of letting this happen. And it's important to just refocus a little bit. The grand theater analogy to me is so good. It's like we're in this theater, this chaotic stage of researchers waving around these studies like props. One shouts, sugar's fine. And then, it's poison. And Big Food, the cunning director, just grins from the wings of the stage. They're bankrolling this mess. They're behind the scenes, just happy that there's no clear conclusion, that there's no direction, that there's no decision, and that people are kind of just handing over their fate a bit. And so, the audience, you, me, doctors, policymakers, just sit paralyzed, waiting for clarity that never comes. So I think that for us, just acknowledging that there's a bit of theater going on, there's a bit of this feeling that we're kind of watching from the sidelines, wondering, when is the change actually going to happen? I'm going to take a little sip of water here. When is the change actually going to happen? And so, Big Food's marketing muscle has done a great job with just keeping this charade going. They spend $14 billion a year on ads in the U.S. alone, with 80% of those pushing fast food, sugary drinks, etc. Coca-Cola dropped $327 million on Coke ads in 2022. They're really trying to create this, this illusion around, and granted, these are marketing ads, these are not necessarily just studies, but, it's contributing to the minutia. They're taking advantage of kind of this stage that is in front of them where, they're able to prey on emotions. And, as, these confusing studies get released, it just kind of keeps people in this little gridlock. And so, I think that the lobbying is also a big part of it. You've got the relentless lobbying budget, $178 million in 2023 from the food sector going into lobbying, just to gain political influence. That's crazy. Then we're just spending billions of dollars on this academic research. This theater, this stage, we've got academia spending $9.2 billion, estimated $9.2 billion on these studies. We're just assuming $500,000 per study, 18,000 studies or 15,000 studies done in 2020, 18,000 projected in 2025. That's insane. We're just what's going on there? Doesn't that just feel like we're kind of missing the mark on how we're approaching this problem? And so, I think that there's just a tragic amount of waste. I think it's, billions and billions of dollars just being kind of lit on fire when the solution is get outside, walk, move, pull out the toxins, pull out the processed foods. And so, like, what do we need to study more is kind of my question. In this public paralysis, there's this victimhood. The victims are us. We're paralyzed by these conflicting studies, and these ads are targeting our kids. We know what to eat. We know we need to be eating real food to move forward. But big foods got their hooks in us, and the SOAR, this made up metric that I've come up with, is here to end that. And so, we're just missing the mark. These studies are a simple tool in big food's tool belt, in my opinion. If there has been no noticeable change in policy, if the outcomes are continuing to get worse, from 1970 to 2025, the outcomes are just getting worse, and we're studying the problem more. I just think it's time to probably wake up here. And so, that's what I'm going to try to wake up the people, get the people going a little bit. And so I think reclaiming our health starts with just a simple approach of these 6 pillars: rest, fuel, movement, reducing toxins, community, and then that inside out health approach that we talked about. It almost feels dumb to explain some of this, and I'm sorry if that comes across as heavy-handed, but I love the simplicity. I love the basics. I think the basics are where most people need to focus: the consistency, just pouring into the right habits. We're talking about a systemic societal shift here. And this solution that I've laid out, it's something that's near and dear to me, because I think it falls in lines with my beliefs, which is that rest is at the start of all of this, and that we don't need a scientific study to tell us to rest, and that operating from a place of restfulness gives us more capacity to make some of these changes. Then we move into fueling. If we're just getting 90% of our foods from just real whole foods, cutting out different people, all the processed foods, all the different chains in our food system, if we're just cutting those out, we are making leaps. We are making massive strides. These are kind of the macro level shifts, the tectonics moving, that I think, if we got some of these things set in motion where people were focused on getting their hands on whole foods instead of these highly processed foods, we'd be in a much better place. And easier said than done. Going back to that study that I talked about, there's obviously socioeconomic factors here, but nothing stopping anyone from going out and walking, which is the next movement component here, is just getting your steps in. Again, just incredibly simple but harder to implement. But if we're prioritizing and just trying to flip this script that we're watching this theater happening, it's going to take like a ground up individualistic movement, cultural movement that happens where people are unwilling and just not wanting to participate in the sickness and disease perpetuation. So, after movement, reducing toxins, one of the things that I like to talk about is just making simple changes that you don't have to think about ever again. So, in a matter of 20 minutes, you can order a water filter, a shower filter, and an air filter, and immediately improve the health of your environment tenfold. That's simple. Then you get rid of some plastics in your house, and you start making some of these small changes over time. It doesn't all need to happen at once. And lo and behold, you start eliminating some of these toxins, and your body starts functioning better. You start feeling better. These are the types of wins that keep you out of the hospital, keep you healthy. Then you start leaning into a community, a group of people that are also moving in the same direction that you are. You have other people who are pushing you. They want to share meals together. They want to talk about their purpose, what they're doing with their lives, the things that they're building, the things that they're interested in. I think that community can just be such a source of that change, or that solidification of who you're becoming. And, fitness communities, they're all over the world. We're here in Austin, Texas here, at the Meat Mafia and at Noble. And, there's just an endless amount of fitness groups, potentially too much depending on who you ask, but I don't think there's too much of this stuff. I think it's incredible, that people are connecting over community. It builds accountability. It actually sustains the wellness. It's an incredible practice. So, I think that if you can just get in that reflex of making it communal, making it something where you're sharing it with other people, just kind of like puts you on autopilot. I mean, you don't have to really think much about it. It's kind of like the thing, you are the average is the most cliche thing I'll ever say. You are the average of the 5 people that you spend time with, but it's true. And, if you do that from a health perspective, things are going to work out. And then kind of the last component of this 6-pillar solution is the inside out health approach. This is just pointing to, something that I think we talked about on the Ben Greenfield podcast. There's this conflicting narrative in the health community around biohacking and over-indexing to all of these quantifiable little metrics that we're tracking, which I think is fantastic. But I also think that you can lose the forest through the trees, and you start to over-index your health, and you really start to lose a lot of the purpose as to why you're getting healthy or why you started to implement some of these changes to begin with. And so I think that having a faith forward approach to your health, where you're prioritizing a spiritual practice, prioritizing community, building your relationship with God, I think that these are things that really span no limits in terms of the change that they can make. And so I just want to pause here and provide a second framework in terms of how to implement some of these changes, because all of that stuff that I just espoused and talked about is great. And I think that, there's a lot to be gained from implementing them, but it's super overwhelming. No one who's getting off the couch is going to be able to implement all that at once. And that's not the expectation. First off, if you're listening to this, the expectation is slowly and gradually starting to implement some changes. So, this is what I would say just from a health. This is the health triad, a simple framework, 3 steps or 3 kind of phases of your health growth. The first is foundational. The second is kind of a refinement period. And then the third is a mastery period. And that first phase is a step. You're improving your sleep. You're getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep. This is something I've been focused on a lot more recently. I had my buddy Kyle Lasota on the podcast a while back, and he was saying, someone told him this advice: the one thing you can do to improve your health is to get to bed on time, the same time every night. And when he said that, I was like, that's the most brilliant thing I've ever heard. It's so easy. It's so simple. It literally speaks my language, because I just don't try to overcomplicate any of this stuff. And I didn't really start to implement it immediately. And then I've started to track recently, just trying to get to bed right at 9 o'clock. I mean, it's hard to get that habit change to actually happen. But once you get in that pattern, going to bed at 9, waking up at 5, waking up at 6, whatever it is, you can actually start to materially see how much benefit there is, how much alpha there is in terms of having the same energy every day, and not feeling like you have different modalities of energy every single day, and just having that drive. And quite frankly, I'm a younger guy. I think having some of those nights where you're, less than 7 hours of sleep, grinding, doing your thing, or going out and celebrating, having a good time, like, that's fine. I'm talking kind of like a 80-20, 90-10 rule here. And I think if you really hammer that home and are good on 90% of your days, like, that's a massive win. And so on top of that, in this foundational phase, talking about 7 to 9 hours of sleep, 90% whole foods, 15,000 steps. And if you do this is where you start feeling way more energized. You lose that brain fog. You might lose a few pounds. You might start feeling more athletic. You might drop a pant size. This is where that momentum really, after 2, 3, 4 weeks of this, you start to really feel good. That's where the momentum happens. And so I think it's a beautiful, this foundational period is beautiful. And then the refinement is kind of just starting to throw some darts out there, get the water filter, join some run clubs, add some resistance training in there, really start to build those like core, implement those core habits and just lock them in. Find something that's fun to do. Where's the fun? We gotta make this health thing fun. And, you can go out, play basketball, go kayak, here in Austin, you can go kayak all day. You can do some stand up paddleboard, all this good stuff. And then, the mastery phase is like, hey, go out there and, go out with a sense of purpose around one of these goals. Go master pull-ups, go, deepen your spiritual practices. I think that, we're talking about health. We're talking about this obesity problem at the beginning of this pod, but how much of this is like, issues related to eating? To me, it's like almost feels like a purpose related issue. Like, if you have a purpose, you want to take care of your body so you can fulfill that purpose, so you can do the things that you want to do, so you can, build the business, build the family. I'm like, if you've got extra energy to pour into the things that you really want to be doing and building, come on, like that is just, it's like extra money in the bank, in my opinion. And so, I think that this framework works for a few reasons. It gives us a full rejection of the over-intellectualization, fully rejected. We have rejected the premise that studies matter when it comes to health, when it comes to, fighting back against the obesity epidemic. And, it's focusing on the human design. It's playing into the things that we're designed to be good at. We're designed to rest. We're designed to get sleep and to let our body's natural healing processes take place. We're designed to eat whole foods. We're not designed to eat processed garbage. And so I think that when we start pressing into some of these things that we're designed to do, getting in the sun, going for a walk, this is where the alpha is. This is the margin in your life that starts to expand. And this is where the change happens. So my call to action, the SOAR's utility, that metric that I'm pulling out, where, you just see this rapid, studying everything and nothing changes. Actually, something did change. We got worse. So this is a wake up call, not a stat sheet. This is not like, these metrics aren't something that's, going to win, some sort of award at some sort of, scientific conference. But this is a push to live your health out and not study it. Implement, take action. Action is, it really is. It's where the rubber meets the road. This is the stuff that I think really matters. And so if I can encourage you guys in anything I said, go out there, make a change. If you're kind of feeling stuck, you need to get moving a little bit more. Yeah. Make one or two changes. Let's start making a shift 1 week at a time. So here's some next steps. Pick one. So we've got this 3-step, I said the health triad, the simple framework. We've got 3. We've got the foundational, the refinement, the mastery. Pick one habit from this first step, from the foundational step, and just lock it in. 7 hours of sleep, 15,000 steps, 90% whole foods. Let's lock that in for a week, 2 weeks, see what happens. Track it in a journal. Step 2, connect with one other person. So bring somebody else along for the ride. Step 3, and then give a little bit of reflection time daily. So step 4 is 5 minutes of daily reflection. Just to I think that a lot of these, the fact that this is a societal health problem means that, and that this plays into the thought around the theater of it all. I think we're all kind of like watching the same movie, and no one's really stepping outside the theater and going, is this movie worth watching? And so, take 5 minutes a day, give yourself some accountability, just like, hey, is this working? Am I seeing this thing the right way? Do I feel like I'm getting better? Do I feel like I'm actually putting in the right amount of effort? Do I need to work harder at this? Do I need to focus more? Do I need to find a better accountability partner? Do I need to rest more? I mean, there's a million things that if you just raise the level of awareness, you will see some benefits just by acknowledging it, accepting it as kind of the truth, and moving through that. So the closing challenge here is health is a choice, not a study. Let's end the charade. Let's stop the theater. The theater, to me, I think we've all kind of grown aware that it needs to end. We need this to stop, this whole theater of us playing into this, getting sick and being diseased and being unhealthy. Again, realizing that there's a lot of things working against us in this, but let's not play the victim. So if you guys like this podcast, if you enjoyed this solo rip, shoot me a DM, Meat Mafia Harry on Instagram. Shoot me a message. We're the Meat Mafia Podcast over on Substack. I'm starting to write a lot more over on Substack, so go follow us on Substack. I love writing. I'm getting back into it. I had my buddy Brad Kearns, who responded to this article that I wrote last week, the Over-Intellectualization of Health, and he just said, "Whoa, great article! This is awesome." And I was like, "All right, I need to start writing again. I'm gonna lose it if I don't use it." And so he got me started again, thinking about writing more. So I appreciate you, Brad Kearns. And so go check out the Substack. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, usually we do podcast style interviews. We have guests on. We've had incredible guests. We had Ben Greenfield on the podcast recently. We've had Paul Check. We've had Joel Salatin, Will Harris, Callie Means, all these incredible people. We had Marty McCary, who's now the head of the FDA. We've had all these people, these cool people on the podcast. So I highly encourage you guys to go check out those podcast interviews. I can link everything that you've heard here. I'll link that study in the show notes that I read at the beginning, just so you guys can check it out. I'll link the 6 pillars to reclaiming your health. I'll link that in the show notes. I'll link my original essay in the show notes. And so I'll leave everything for you guys in the show notes. So go check it out. Go check out the Substack, and also go check out Noble Origins. NobleOrigins.com. Meat Mafia is the code. You get 15% off your next purchase. We appreciate you guys, and thank you for listening.